Welcome to One Insight. My name is Rich Litvin. I grew up in London and I now live in LA. And this is a podcast for extraordinary top performers. You see, I've coached some of the most successful and talented people on the planet. I see what most people cannot see, and I dare to say what most people wouldn't dare to say. And what I know about success is that on the other side of it, it can actually be lonely. You can feel like more of an imposter the more successful you become. And when you're the most interesting person in the room, you're actually in the wrong room. I coach around insight. Life looks one way, something happens, the world looks different, and your entire world changes. It can happen in an instant. And this podcast is called One Insight because a single insight can change everything. I had a fun conversation with Alina just now. And I'm about to take you into that conversation, but I want to give you context. Alina is one of my clients because she read my book, The Prosperous Coach. And she read my book, The Prosperous Coach, because one of her friends, who's a member of 4PC, my high-level community, said to her, if you only ever read one book on coaching, this has to be the book that you read. And what you'll hear Alina ask me about is about, what's the title I should use for my book, and should I publish with a mainstream publisher or self-publish? And really behind all the questions I'm asking her and wherever we go on this is this premise of, if you're going to write a book, how do you write a book that speaks so clearly to your right people that someone says, if you only ever read one book on this topic, you have to read this book. That's what excites me when I'm talking to people about creating a book. I'm not interested in whether you can get a book publishing deal with a mainstream publisher. I'm not interested whether you can sell a book to 1 million people. There are ways to do that. In fact, if you spend enough money, you can get a book on the New York Times bestseller list. That's less interesting to me than how do you create a book for your dream clients? How do you write to your dream clients? I could have made a lot more money if I'd written version 2 of The Prosperous Coach and version 3 of The Prosperous Coach, but that wouldn't have excited me. What happened at the end of The Prosperous Coach is I wrote a chapter about what I called back then the High Achieving Introvert Project. It turns out 8 or 9 years later, I was less interested in whether you're an introvert or not than whether or not you played a game around high-level performance, whether or not you have a track record of success behind you and still you have a big dream ahead of you. That excites me about people. It's probably why you're listening or watching me right now. So bear that in mind as you hear me work with Alina. It's from this premise. If you're creating anything in the world, how do you create it for the current top 20% of your people? Now that's an exciting question for me to answer. And it was fun to dive in with Alina around this idea of the book that she's creating next. Hi, Alina.
Hi, Rich.
So we said we'll play today. I like to not know where we're going to go in these conversations. And you said something to do with my book. So tell me more. I don't even know what the book is. What you got?
Well, I have been writing this book for 18 months now. And I finished. Well, it's a first draft. Mm-hmm. The book is called Audacity Spectrum, which is really very close to my heart because I always say I've become really fascinated about this word audacity because of the way my son shows up in life. And for me, one of the things what I'd love to explore today, if we can, because I know you are such an expert with a wordsmith, certainly in my opinion, is I have got a stop line, they're sort of explaining what it is and what it, at the moment it says, dialing up the courage to dare, care, and not care. Because for me, I'm really excited about the daring, the caring, but also at points in our lives when we don't need to care. We just need to listen to our own intuition rather than what the world says to us. So yeah, that's what, in a nutshell, this book is all about. And it is Well, it's a sort of combination. I call it a cocktail, actually, of personal, professional, and very practical. So practical tips and very pragmatic, because that's how my brain works. I love pragmatism. And I call it a sort of leadership manifesto, because when I work with leaders, I always say every single one is a leader. A parent is a leader. It's how we lead self. And it's only when we learn and master how to lead self, we can lead others. So,
look, I love everything you said to me. I think there's some really cool stuff in here. Let me go back, though, first to find out, what's this for? What's the purpose of this in the first place? Because I can help you craft great titles, but I'm not a copywriter. I'm not I don't care about a great book title unless it's in service of a mission. What's the mission of this book?
Well, the mission of the book is it's really to spread the sort of knowledge that I've got. I always say that, my son has got, just as a background, he's got high functioning autism. Mm-hmm. And what I do in the world is I teach emotional intelligence, which I call it sort of 10 muscles. And the story that I've got is I am on one side of the spectrum, which is why I call it spectrum. So I have got an emotional intelligence score in the top quartile, whereas my son would have it in the bottom quartile, I think. And that's the story. However, the emotional intelligence as we know it today, it's been 25 years of research in this field, is it can be stretched. We can dial it up. That's the nut of it. And my son is the biggest testimony, actually. And, I will, even me being with you today is not short of a miracle.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a hotel, which is not where I normally would be. So that takes me out of my own comfort zone. And in emotional intelligence language, I call superpowers and edges. So we all have a strong muscle and we all have a low muscle. It's just all relative, regardless of the scores. And my highest muscle is optimism and my lowest muscle is adaptability. So universe always tests my adaptability. Every time there is an important event, that's what gets tested or stretched. And today was one of those examples. As I think I've just said to you just before we met, I almost didn't make it because the hotel didn't have any internet for a few hours before you and I met. So I just said to myself, part of the adaptability is acceptance, is like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It wasn't meant to be. So, that's sort of for me constantly talking to that adaptability muscle. So that's for me. I really wanted to share that because my son, if you were to test him, one of the muscles is, for example, self-control. Is how do you cope with stress and high pressure? So he will have a low score on that. Adaptability for sure, or certainly used to, because any change for him, even a bus stop, or a bus changing the timetable will really send him into a panic attack. Now, he's here. He's been here for a week on a horse riding farm that he's never seen before. He didn't have a clue where we were going to be. Neither did I. And it's more for me than for him. I'm staying 10 minutes away. He's been cooking for himself on his own, which is not short of a miracle. So I truly, for me, just to talk about his story really excites me, but then to extrapolate that to how we could do.
So take a pause for a moment, because I'm really enjoying listening to you. I'm enjoying hearing the principles that will be in this book. I enjoyed what the premise of the book is in the first place, the possible title. I enjoyed hearing the distinctions between you and your son and what you see, your insights and your learning from all these years of studying and teaching emotional intelligence. I love this idea of superpowers versus edges. It's very interesting to me. It has me wonder, when does a superpower actually become an edge if used too much? And when is an edge actually a superpower if you pay attention to it? So all of this is a fascinating conversation for me. And I got no doubt, because you mentioned you've written the first draft of the book, there's really great stuff in here and that can be honed. Who's it for? Who's the audience for? Your dream reader. If you could pick one person, oh my God, if this person read the book, I would be thrilled. It doesn't matter if it's somebody famous, somebody not known. Who's the number one dream reader? If I could put it in the hand of this person, I'd be thrilled.
Well, you know what comes to mind is what I call the spiky profile. So are the people, the clients that I work with, which, because I've seen their emotional intelligence reports, are who have got either very high scores off the charts like I do, or very low scores, like I know many of my clients have. And therefore, they will really benefit from knowing, as you said, and you've just nailed it. I mean, that's a great insight, because some of these superpower strengths so easily can become weaknesses when they're in overdrive. And I know that from experience. And it's the opposite of someone like my son or some of my clients who have got a very low score, which can actually turn into a superpower if you know how to do this. And so those will be my dream client, my dream readers, if you like.
No, that's really interesting. I love that idea. So actually, it's people at either ends of the spectrum that are really fascinating to you. It's not that anyone else couldn't get value from this book, but absolutely too empathic. You'll be overwhelmed by other people's stuff. And actually, lots of entrepreneurs are at a level on the spectrum where that ability not to pay attention to other people's feelings is what allows them to be so successful. There's a price they'll pay for it, but there's real value in there too in different ways. So this is really interesting. What's your desire to happen with the book? I meet some people who say, I want to sell 1 million copies. And that's never really interested me. Even when I wrote The Prosperous Coach, it wasn't about, does it get to 1 million people? It was, can people make something of this? So can they use it? Is it a practical guide for people? And the most common message I get from people is they send me a photo of The Prosperous Coach, and it's either highlighted all over or it's got little post-it notes as bookmarks throughout it. And I'm always thrilled. I get those on a regular basis, those photos. What's the desire for you for this book?
Well, to be honest, I think, I know that we're sort of recording it. If I send that to a publisher, there's no, for me, I have no desire to sell 1 million copies. I'm sure they will not particularly like that message. For me, it's truly to
but I'm not a publisher, so we can have a really honest conversation here.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. And, that's one of the other things for me, the sort of brutal honesty is what really excites me, which is why those spikes excite me a lot. Yeah. So what I would love is to get into the hands of those type of people who will see real value. And I always say, really understand that there is no right or wrong and there is no superpower or edge. They're both the two sides of the same coin. And for them to love it, for me, if they're just, I always say for my kids, actually, it's like a little manual, like a little Bible for them to read and say, oh, I know now what to do sometimes.
Now that's interesting because it can be a very different book if you write it as a guide for kids, whether they're young or they've grown up at some point and they want to see this. So I want us to have a really honest conversation as if I'm not a publisher, because I'm not, to find out what's your real desire for this book. Because the moment you're in conversation with the publisher, things go in a different way. I've been talking to a publisher about the book I've been writing for a few years behind the scenes. The working title is something like Beyond Success. This idea of most books are written about how to be successful. There's very few that are about, I don't see any really about what happens, the price you pay and what happens on the other side of success. That really fascinates me. Every time I talk to a big name publisher, they're interested in me because I've got a book that's been very successful already, have a big audience. And then they say things like, oh, well, that we couldn't sell a book like that. The audience for that is tiny. Well, it is, but it's my audience. And I love this idea of writing a tiny book for my people. And it doesn't have to have a big name publisher. In fact, these days, you can get a graphic designer and a book on Amazon that will look like a high quality book published by a top name publisher, and no one can tell the difference. There are hardly any bookstores left these days. And where I live, Amazon have just opened up a bookstore because they've shut down all the bookstores that can't afford to compete with them. And now there are Amazon bookstores opening up. And that's the world we live in, that everything mostly that we create will be seen online. So you can really get clear on the intention of this book. There can be different versions of this book for different people. So as I say that and give you some possibilities, what's most exciting for you? Is it a book that goes into the hands of a potential client and they read it and go, oh my God, I got to work with Alina? Is it a book that you could put in the hands of someone like your son at some particular age and that person can read it and it will shift their life? Is it more than one purpose? What have you got?
No, thank you for that, Rich. And I love it. I mean, for me, I think where my energy goes is both somehow. But yes, and I really appreciate, I think in terms of the publisher versus doing it yourself, because I love the possibilities. For me, I haven't yet excluded the possibility of just doing it myself, as you said, these days. And I mean, I am, one of my edges is self-control. I would love to do it. I don't have a lot of patience. So if I'm going to give it a try to do it to the traditional publishing, because people are saying to me that's worth pursuing. So I don't want to totally exclude it. But audacious.
Well, again, so let's come back to purpose. Because you're talking about a solution. And when people say, don't exclude that. Well, it depends who they are and why they have that particular mindset. So my interest is you right now to see what would make you come alive. I'm in conversations with a big name publisher right now about my next book. They want me to rewrite a version of the Prosperous Coach because they've seen how much money that has made. They know it will be successful. And I'm debating, do I want to rewrite that book? Or I can write a different version of it. Do I actually want to do that? It could make a lot of money. It could be, could go out in the world and sell a lot of copies. Does that actually excite me? And that's the question I'm interested in as I look at you, not could you do it? And there's three ways. You can self-publish a book. You can go to a small publisher, like we did with the Prosperous Coach, or a big name publisher. Frankly, for most of us, big name publishers, unless you've got such a unique take or you've got such a large audience already, they won't be interested in you. And if you have that large an audience, the question is, why do you need them? So that's a different question. But what lights you up? What excites you?
Yeah, no, thank you for that distinction. Actually, what really excites me is having a beautiful book. I mean, I know that it's part of my perfectionism, but beautiful is when people look at it, when they read it, they think, wow, that's my purpose. And I wouldn't, now you made me almost very clear that I'm not going to rewrite it. If a publisher says you need to rewrite this chapter, oh no, thank you very much. That's almost like distinction of a clear no for me. Yeah. When I teach people to say no, I think I've become quite clear. So that's a big insight from you, Rich. Thank you. That I am not willing to wait 2 years and rewrite chapters. Actually. Yeah.
I mean, that's what will happen on that journey with a big name publisher. Yeah. When we created the Prosperous Coach, one of my friends is a super great, very successful designer, and I asked if he designed the front cover, and he said he would. And I said, here's my idea for the front of the Prosperous Coach. I want it to look like it's a New York Times best-selling book. It's not my intent. I'm not trying to do that. There are ways to get New York Times bestsellers. If you spend about $250,000, you can get yourself a New York Times bestseller. There are companies literally who will help you do that. I had no interest. I'm creating a book for my kind of clients, and I want it to look that beautiful that I'm proud of it in years' time. And I really am. It's got a beautiful, clean, clear cover. I love the image. I chose the image, but he created it. I love the cover of that book. I wanted it to feel like that. So I really feel you on that one. That's great. And it's good to get really clear on all of this. If you have a publisher, they will tell you the wording that goes on the cover, and they'll tell you the title, and they put the image on. And there's a lot of things that are out of your control.
Yes. Thank you for making that clear. And actually it is. I stand, but control is one of my edges. So I'd rather keep control if I could.
Yeah. Look, I'll come back to where we began. You called it Audacity Spectrum.
Yes.
I like the word "the" in front of that. The Audacity Spectrum. It's a thing. It's the Audacity Spectrum, which gets me curious. What is the Audacity Spectrum? I'm aware of other spectrums, but I don't know about the Audacity Spectrum. Any title that gets somebody curious, there's something interesting. I love what you say already. There's a couple of things you said which are really great. Dialing up the courage to dare, care, and not care. I think that's awesome. I think it says it all. You don't need to explain the not care. You began to explain it to me. You didn't need to. People will get it. And then you said something else very interesting. I'll adapt some of your words, but this is a personal, professional, and very practical guide to leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all there. I see the title at the top, underneath it. So the Audacity Spectrum, dialing up the courage to dare, care, and not care. And somewhere underneath it, it says a personal and professional, or maybe professional first, a professional and personal and practical guide to leadership. It's all there.
Thank you. Fabulous.
Yeah. I mean, they're your words. I love it. I think there's real power in this. I think there's, let me ask you this. Well, no, let me check in first. It sounds like that lands. I mean, they're your words, really. I've shifted them ever so slightly, but it sounds like that lands for you.
No, it lands enormously. Thank you, Rich. And of course they're my words, but I know, you say it's ever so slightly. It's even the ever so slightly is the thing that makes the biggest difference in life.
Yeah.
It's the tiniest step that makes the biggest impact. So I don't want you to diminish it in any way, because it's not ever so slightly. So thank you for that. But it lands enormously, because for me, I love it. And having someone else said it to me, and I'll tell you the story in a moment, is like, you should have a which I was contemplating, but I wasn't convinced. I could see now from just having that explanation of how and why that would be important. And then keeping the dialing and the caring and daring and not daring. It's it's all
so
there.
Already I hear there's a tool. You need to create a tool called the Audacity Spectrum. How do I assess myself? And the very first thing, this is the lead magnet for the book. This is what, come and take your Audacity Spectrum assessment or Audacity assessment. You need to have some dials on here. The courage dials. The dial around daring, the dial around caring, and the dial around not caring. What will be around the dial? How do you measure that? So some great tools already that are coming to me that you'll have in this. And if you don't yet have this as part of the book, I think this would be very interesting to either tell stories or have little pieces from interviews with very high functioning people who are high on the emotional intelligence spectrum, mm-hmm. and very high functioning people who are low on the emotional intelligence spectrum, because those are your dream readers. So telling some stories from both sides of those books, I think would be both sides of the spectrum would be really interesting.
Yes, no, thank you. And I already do have that. It's interesting because the story is, it could get lost, what I call, into the law of averages.
Yes.
So if someone has got a very high optimism and a very high empathy, let's call it, but they have a very low straightforwardness. The straightforwardness is the communication. And it's what you were talking about. High empathy, but low straightforwardness is someone who cares so much about the rest and they don't have the courage to speak up. Although on average, the EQ could be, average or above average. This particular muscle, unless you dial it up, there's going to be pain. And most people have actually learned how, to deal with that pain. They put masks, they do, they found all sorts of coping mechanisms, of course. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's those type, as I said, you still could come as an okay emotional intelligence, which is...
Yeah, but you want to be really clear to write to your audience. When we wrote The Prosperous Coach, Steve and I, a number of PR people said to us, call it the Prosperous Entrepreneur. The principles are exactly the same. We can get you in Inc. magazine, Forbes, we can get you out in the world. And we said, you know what? We know our audience. Mm-hmm. We went really, really narrow. And this is a book for coaches. I get people constantly telling me, I'm not a coach, but I read your book. It had a massive impact on me. But I knew my audience. And I think there's something in here. Either there's 2 sections or mm-hmm. 2 particular chapters. If you're already very high functioning on the emotional intelligence scale, read this. Mm-hmm. If you have high functioning autism, I've written this for you. There's mm-hmm. something here for both of those audiences that you've got to really be clear about that you speak to in this book. So when there's the right person, you say, hey, I wrote this book for you, read chapter 4. I wrote this book for you, start on page 33. Just read those next 2 pages, it's for you. That's when people go, oh my God, you wrote this for me.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. Well, what that shows to me is I need to do a little bit more work on those chapters. But yeah, no, fun to actually make that so clear and so distinction for that readership.
Because otherwise you go into that kind of average, the place where you write a book that lots of people say, we really liked it.
Yes.
Your job is not to write a book that people like. Your job is to write a book that polarizes people. I get people who say constantly, the Prosperous Coach is too simplistic. It's too basic. Yeah, it's very, very simple. We have taken a very old-fashioned approach to business that has happened for 2,000 years. People have built businesses by word of mouth, serve people, and they'll talk about you, and they'll come back for more. And we've shown how to adapt that for modern day times, particularly if you're a coach. It's a very simple premise. It's written in very simple language, and some people absolutely love it, and some people hate it. And that's polarizing. That's what you want to create a book so that your dream people go, oh my God, did you write this for me? And others are like, it's not my thing. You want that. And it's hard because the human part of it's like, oh no, I want you all to like it. It won't be a book that's meaty enough for your right people.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't want everybody to like it. And that's the truth, to be honest. I think it's the right people to like it. You're right. And simplicity, my God. I mean, your book, I loved it. I think I told you the story is, someone did me a favor. And, our common friend Mandy, and she said, if you read no other book on coaching, that's the one to do. And I trusted her so much, and I did. And
so let me pause you. That's great. I want to catch this. Yeah. And that was the reason you're in my community. You've been here. You want a book that people say, if you read no other book on this topic, you must read this one. That's what you got to get to. That's the mission of this book. And that is what we'll have. We've sold 80,000 copies, getting close to 90,000 now. But I didn't try to write a book to be a bestseller. That was not on my list. I wrote a book, and I want to have that intention. And it's the reason you're here, that someone said to you, if you read nothing else, you've got to read this book. That's what goes up on your list somewhere, your dream list. I have a book that if just one person says, if you read nothing else on leadership or emotional intelligence, you've got to read this book.
I love that. See, this is it. This is the biggest insight, because it's so true. It is to write it with that intention, that intentionality that someone says, if you read no other book on this, like a lot of people do with yours. And that I do, people that I think have got a huge potential as coaches, is the first book that I say, this is the one to do. If you read Rich's book, then we can chat. But absolutely, I think that is the advocacy. See, one of the things I didn't say to you is, because it's Audacity, I set out this audacious intention to write the book with most A's in, just playfully. So that's my sort of almost in the introduction. So all of the chapters start with an A, and one is advocacy. Because when you care so much about something, that is the sort of my definition of advocacy. And I know I've learned that from you, the advocate.
So let me distinguish it for anyone who's listening. That means you create something that other people want to tell people about. That's why you're in my program, because someone told you about who I am and what I do, and why you read my book. And that's what we call advocacy, and that's what you're creating. So I love that all the chapters begin with A, and this is it. This is the premise of this book. It's so powerful that people say to the right person, if you read nothing else, you've got to read this. Alina, thank you so much for today.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rich, for all of the insights. But yeah, I love it. That's it. I'm going to go and have it there as the intention of the book. Thank you.
For most of human history, it wasn't called coaching. It was called leadership. And it's what I love to do, to coach people, to lead people, and to mess with people's thinking. If you'd like more of this, or if you'd like to learn more about our community of extraordinary top performers, go to richlitvin.com/oneinsight.